In this video, you will learn how the Great Fire of London started, what made it unstoppable, and how long it lasted. You will also discover how many homes were destroyed, the cost of damage in today's money, and how many people died as a result of the fire. Additionally, you will learn about the changes made to fire prevention in England after the disaster and how London was rebuilt. Before the Great Fire, London was a big and crowded city, with about 300,000 to 400,000 people. It had grown beyond its old city walls, without much planning. The city was dirty, full of smoke, and had just been through a terrible outbreak of the plague. The streets were narrow and filled with wooden houses, packed close together, which made fires very dangerous. London had already faced several big fires before 1666, and because most buildings were made of wood and had thatched roofs, the risk of fire was even higher. The narrow streets made it hard for firefighters to reach fires quickly. At the same time, the people of London did not have a good relationship with the king. The city had supported the Republicans during the English Civil War, so when the Great Fire started, the city leaders refused the king's offer to send soldiers to help. The royal soldiers were still not trusted. By the time the king took over from the Lord Mayor, who had been slow and unsure, the fire was already too big to control. The Lord Mayor waited too long to give the order to tear down houses to stop the fire from spreading, which made things worse. Fighting fires mostly meant pulling down buildings or using water. But after the fire destroyed the water wheels under London Bridge, there was not enough water. Fire engines existed, but they were hard to move and not very effective. All these problems made it almost impossible to stop the Great Fire. The crowded streets also made it very hard for people to escape, causing panic and chaos as the fire tore through the city. The fire started at a bakery in Padding Lane little after midnight on Sunday, September 2nd, 1666, and quickly spread to nearby houses. The Lord Mayor, Sir Thomas Bloodworth, was called to the scene, but he refused to order the demolition of nearby houses to stop the fire, saying it was not his decision to make. Bloodworth is generally thought to have been appointed to the office of Lord Mayor as a yes-man, rather than by possessing requisite capabilities for the job. The fire continued to spread, and by morning it had reached the riverfront and was burning out of control. Samuel Pepys, a diarist, watched the fire from the Tower of London, and then took a boat to inspect the damage. He reported back to the king, who ordered the demolition of houses in the fire's path, but it was too late. The fire had already spread too far, and the streets were filled with people trying to escape. The king himself sailed down the river to inspect the scene and ordered the demolition of more houses to try to stop the fire. By Sunday evening, the fire had become a raging firestorm, fueled by strong winds and narrow streets, and had already destroyed a large part of the city. The Lord Mayor was criticized for his handling of the situation, and the king took charge of the efforts to stop the fire. On Monday, the fire spread to the west and north, reaching the financial heart of the city. The houses of bankers in Lombard Street began to burn, and people rushed to rescue their gold coins. The Royal Exchange and nearby shops also caught fire. The fire was spreading rapidly, and the river was the only thing that stopped it from spreading to the south. London Bridge was on fire, but an open space between buildings on the bridge acted as a firebreak, saving the borough of Southwark. As the fire spread, suspicion arose that it was no accident, and foreigners were immediately suspected. Fear and suspicion hardened into certainty, and there was a wave of street violence. The inhabitants, especially the upper class, were desperate to remove their belongings from the city, and the able-bodied poor hired out as porters. Hiring a cart had cost a couple of shillings the week before the fire. On Monday, it rose to as much as £40, a fortune equivalent to roughly £162,000 in 2025. Meanwhile, Bloodworth, who was responsible as Lord Mayor for coordinating the firefighting, left the city, and the king's brother, James, Duke of York, took charge of operations, setting up command posts and ordering demolitions to try to stop the fire. Despite these efforts, the fire continued to rage, consuming historic buildings like Baynard Castle and Blackfriars. The city was in a state of chaos, with people fleeing and trying to save their belongings, and the fire showing no signs of slowing down. On Tuesday, September 4th, the fire caused the mass destruction. The Duke of York's efforts to stop the fire at Temple Bar failed, and the flames jumped over the River Fleet and continued to spread. The fire reached Cheapside, a luxury shopping street, and began to move east towards the Tower of London. The garrison at the tower took matters into their own hands and created firebreaks by blowing up houses, halting the fire's advance. St. Paul's Cathedral, thought to be a safe refuge, caught fire due to wooden scaffolding and was quickly reduced to a ruin. The wind dropped on Tuesday evening, and the firebreaks created by the garrison finally took effect on Wednesday, September 5th, marking the end of the Great Fire. It took some time until the last traces were put out. Coal was still burning in cellars 2 months later. Many people were left homeless, camping in nearby areas, and the mood was volatile. Charles announced that bread would be brought into the city daily to alleviate food shortages. However, fears of foreign invasion and terrorism remained high, leading to panic and violence against foreigners, which was eventually controlled by troops and the trained bands. The Great Fire of London caused a lot of damage and destruction, with up to 13,500 houses and 87 churches burned down. The fire destroyed approximately 15% of the city's housing. Many important buildings, including St. Peter's Cathedral, the Royal Exchange, the Bridewell Palace, and 3 western city gates, were also destroyed. The fire led to a significant loss of property, with an estimated value of around £10 million, which is equivalent to £2.26 billion in 2025. Unfortunately, 8 people died in the fire, according to sources from that time, and many more struggled to survive in the cold winter that followed, with some dying from hunger and exposure to the fire. The exact number of deaths is still unknown, but is believed to be higher than initially thought. After the Great Fire, the city started to recover, with markets opening and food supplies being re-established. The king encouraged people to move away and settle elsewhere, and the National Charitable Collection was started to support fire victims. However, many people blamed foreigners, especially Catholics, for the fire, and some were even arrested and executed, like Robert Hubert, a French watchmaker who falsely confessed to starting the fire. The king and other leaders tried to calm the situation, but the fire was seen as an opportunity by other countries like France, which tried to take advantage of England's weakness. The fire had a lasting impact on London's culture, economy and architecture, causing a large dislocation of residents and disrupting commercial activity. After the Great Fire of London, a special court was set up to deal with disputes between tenants and landlords, and decide who should rebuild based on ability to pay. The city was rebuilt with wider streets and buildings made of bricks and stone, not wood. Approximately 9,000 new houses were built in the area, in which over 13,000 have been destroyed. The reconstruction saw improvements in hygiene and fire safety. The Great Plague of 1665 killed 80,000 Londoners, but the Great Fire may have saved lives by destroying unsanitary housing and plague-carrying rats and fleas. Many new public buildings were created, including St. Paul's Cathedral and 51 new churches. New fire regulations were imposed and the first insurance companies emerged. These companies hired private firemen and offered incentives for clients who took measures to prevent fires. For example, a cheaper rate for brick versus wooden buildings. The fire also led to a focus on building codes to restrict the spread of fire between units. A monument to the Great Fire was erected, designed by Christopher Wren and Robert Hooke.